Hello. Well, I am a writer and a journalist, as you just heard. I've spent the last 30 years basically traveling the world and telling the story, trying to bring understanding about different cultures and societies to my readers and viewers. In order to do that, I have to go to everywhere first. I must experience it firsthand. That's the way I work. New worlds, old worlds, that's the way I work. And I'm a field reporter at heart. I always have been, and I still am with my novels. There is no place too far, too frozen, or too remote. I will go there. And that works for my books, too. I go to each location in my books to actually bring the locations to my viewers, and I actually video the locations so that my readers can actually see the videos. I have spent decades roaming the world, absolute decades, and I've watched country after country open up and change. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about some of those countries I've been to. My first assignment was in the Soviet Union in the 1980s. And of course, it was a backward, repressed society. It was really, really depressing. But Mikhail Gorbachev understood that the society needed to open because it was so stagnant. So he introduced the principle of glasnost, which means openness. And that openness swept through Eastern Europe. It toppled governments. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, the decline of the Soviet Union in 1991, and I was there to witness that event. My next assignment was in Cuba. Now, that society had been closed since the revolution in the 1950s. U.S. journalists were not allowed in. I was one of the first journalists allowed back into Cuba in the mid-1990s. And when I got there, it was like stepping back in time. It was unbelievable. But as I looked around, I could see that even Cuba was opening up and embracing change, reaching out to Europeans for some investment opportunities. I spent a lot of time in Asia, Japan, Korea, China. I lived in Japan in the 1970s, and that was an amazing time of social awakening in Japan. But of course, you know, the big story was China. And so I went to China, and I saw China opening up, free economic zones, trade, to become the second largest economy in the world, that openness. My most recent trip has basically been to Egypt and the Middle East. I went there twice in the last year to Tahrir Square, an enormous push for change. And that revolution is really unfinished. There's nothing really to conclude from it yet. But because the demographic is so young, I believe that change is inevitable. Now, the change may be violent, it may be peaceful, no one knows, but there is the drive for change. This period now, historians will point to, these decades that I'm talking about, as the most amazing revolutionary period of time. And I have a theory about why. I think it's about the evolution of media. I joined CNN in the early 1980s, and the reason why I joined CNN was because they said they were going to do the first global broadcasts in English. And I thought, that is a real game changer, because up until then, the delivery of news was very sporadic. In the 1930s and 40s, people had to go to a movie theater to see a newsreel to actually know what was happening. And then, of course, in the 1950s, the television came into the home, so news was more accessible. But the anchorman was the narrator, the storyteller. And you remember Walter Cronkite. He basically said, he narrated the story, and then he said his famous tagline, "And that's the way it is." It was a bedtime story to the American public. That's how we got our information. Well, now there is no one single narrator. We are all participants in gathering and disseminating news. We have, of course, we still have professional journalists, but we have citizen journalists. With the small screen, citizen journalists can record. Amateur videographers can put their own, they can self-broadcast on YouTube. Now, social change is happening across borders, across societies. It's an open dialogue, and that will continue. We have 6 billion cell phones in the world, and that number is expected to grow. And some places in the developing world, that's the only source of information that they have. That's where they get their news, from their cell phone. So in conclusion, as a journalist and as a novelist, I see the information world and the entertainment world converging. And social change can now come from a variety of products. It can come from a novel, it can come from a newsreel, it can come from a movie, a book, a song. Social change is all in that. It's all storytelling. Now, they used to say that journalists write the first draft of history. That's the old expression. I don't think it's true anymore. I think we're all writing the first draft of history, all in our own voices, because this is the new era of openness and information. Thank you.